So we have a speaker tonight, and we'll start off with Dr. Jay Sayre, who is from Batelle. He's the manager, director of internal research and development for one of the major groups at Batelle, and has worked at Batelle a long time in many roles. He started educationally as a Ph.D. in materials engineering science, graduate of Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University, and has kind of moved up the ladder of expertise and experience at Batelle. Even though he still continues to do research, he's now managing a group and does a lot of work with internal R&D. So this is kind of the career path that many of you are probably thinking would be very, very cool for you over the next decade or two. He's going to talk to us tonight a little bit about how he manages his day, because that becomes a really big issue, as you'll understand when he starts talking. And do a lot to help us tee up the idea of the white paper that your groups are going to be, your teams are going to be doing. We've got about 7 things we're going to do today, but we're going to start off with the speaker and then go on and review assignments and talk about some of the things we're going to do in class, a worksheet, and some other things. It'll be another busy day. So, Jay, if you'd like to.
Thanks, Yvonne. So, as Yvonne mentioned, I have several jobs at Batelle. I'm not that bright because I get paid for one, but I do have a lot of things going on where I manage people, I conduct research, and I also direct and oversee a lot of research and development that goes on at Batelle. But what I end up, unfortunately, spending most of my time doing, and if you look up on the screens here, is dealing with email. Okay, this is a snapshot of Microsoft Outlook. This is my inbox, and writing small, you don't need to be able to read it, but what you're looking at is my deleted folder from my 2014 archive. And if you look down the lower left-hand corner, there's a startling statistic, at least for me it is. In 2014, I received 16,735 emails. And I don't subscribe to a lot of unnecessary things. All the spam and junk is filtered out. These are real, actionable emails that I have to deal with. So I've got to read, I've got to respond, I've got to take some type of action on them. And I'll save you the math that in terms of working days, it's about 100 emails a day, which I thought was excessive. I thought that was pretty high, but it turns out that's about average or on par in industry, that most folks are getting about 100 emails a day. You're usually sending about another 30 to 50 on top of that. It gets to be pretty daunting. And those rates are projected, some of the numbers I've seen is they're going to grow up to 7% a year for the foreseeable future. So I started digging into some other statistics too, in terms of interruptions, distractions, things that help you or force you to lose focus. And texting obviously is one of them. Texting, I found out over 90% of all texts are read in the first 3 minutes. So that can be very disruptive, obviously, if you're in a work environment. And what's more interesting is 44% of all interruptions are self-inflicted. And there's actually a study out of the University of Michigan, of all places, where they found that, or they concluded, people really don't multitask. They actually multi-switch. They self-interrupt. And they do it to the point to where it actually slows performance by over 50%. And that can be devastating. So don't ever get caught thinking that you can actually multitask. You're just switching back and forth. You can only do one thing well at a time. So what's the conclusion from all that is that there's just too many interruptions. So you got to figure out a way to manage, to deal with those. One of the ways I encourage you to do it, something that I've adopted recently, is get to the point where you only check emails 2 to 4 times a day. I try and restrict myself to 3. I don't always do it. I don't always do that well, but whenever I do, I find it makes a pretty big impact. So I'll come in the morning, check it first thing, then I'll check it around noon, then I'll check it later in the afternoon. And honestly, I usually check it sometime in the evening. There's other times where I check it a little bit more often, but whenever I successfully do that, what ends up happening, that 100 emails a day drives down to 30 to 50. Now, why does that happen? It ends up becoming almost like you're training other people, like you're training a pet or something. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way at all. But what happens is people start realizing, all right, if I send an email to Jay at 9 o'clock, I'm probably not going to hear back till around noon. So can I wait that long? You know, is this something to where maybe I should go talk to him. Am I using the right form of communication to get what I need? Or maybe should I just take this on myself or go see somebody else? However, it starts to weed itself out, and it increases my productivity a lot. It forces other people to think a little bit more careful thought to emails. And then the other thing along that line is about email etiquette. Now, you'll probably learn a little bit about that. There's some important points to that in terms of no one expects you to actually generate a professional letter in an email, but they sure don't expect you to text, email like you text. So, don't fire me an email that says, hey, and use you are instead of your, and start to merge those two worlds. We don't want it to happen like that. We want people to use email in the workplace, again, not to be a professional letter, but think about, the content, put some careful thought into it, because there's usually an ask associated with an email. And don't blindly forward, don't blindly reply all, do things like that to just generate more churn, more distractions. Oh, and the last thing, really, when you're dealing with emails and texting, all those other forms of communication, think long and hard about it. Can it just be solved by either getting up out of your chair and walking and finding that person, or by picking up the phone and talking to them if they're more remote? I still find people that are constantly they're either texting, IMing, or emailing back and forth, and the other person's right over on the other side of the cube wall. And so they end up iterating, getting caught in this never-ending do loop, if you will. It may turn up a few hours. They could have solved it with a few seconds of a conversation. Now, this is one of my favorite quotes, and I know it's a little dated. It goes back to '77. Most of you probably weren't born then. But it's, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. Now, it is a dated statement, but I think that's never more true than it is today, because you're getting bombarded with all kinds of information. The unfortunate thing about all that information is most of it's garbage. And you've got to find a way to actually dig through all the garbage and focus on what you're looking at and find out what is the most important thing that I'm reading, that I'm searching, that I'm hearing. Don't just pull everything in. Because everyone, the unfortunate thing whenever you're trying to really separate yourself from the pack and actually write a good white paper or whatever form of technical communication you're trying to work in, is everyone out there has access to the same information. Everyone can jump on their favorite search engine or get access to a certain database. They can find it. They can find it for the most part. There's some things that you can't get to, but for the most part, everyone's got access to the same information. So what are you going to do that's unique with it? What are you going to do to not get lost in it? You've got to be able to focus through this, because you've got to be able to make non-obvious connections among the data. You've got to do something different than everybody else is doing. And then you've got to be able to actually create an original thought. A lot of people take that lightly. They think they can just gather a bunch of information, dump it on your desk, and that's the product output that you're looking for. I can get anybody to do that. I can train a monkey to do that. I need somebody that's actually going to go out there, scan the world, find things that are non-obvious to everybody else, and piece that all together into an original thought. And so, how do you do that? It goes back to my earlier statement on this slide, which is when you're looking at all the information that's out there, whether you're reading it, you're listening to someone, you're searching on the internet, what have you, always got to be asking yourself, what's the most important thing? What's the most important message in this piece of literature or what somebody's saying? Really challenge yourself, because once you start identifying the most important things, then pull yourself back out of all that noise and try and connect the dots between those multiple pieces of important information. Once you start connecting them, you start making these more non-obvious connections. And then use your mind, and you'll be able to create something original from that. You'll be able to create that original thought, and that's where you really provide value. So now I want to get on the topic that I'm really here for to focus on are these white papers. And specifically, I'm talking about white papers in research and development, because this is my world. Now, just for starters, there's no single definition, no standard. There's no template that you can just grab and fill the blanks in for the most part. So you're really starting from blank canvases. But the one thing that's really key is they're all persuasive papers. You know, you're all scientists and engineers, but you better accept real fast that you got a little bit of a salesperson in you, or you better get one fast, because if you like doing cool science, cool engineering, eventually you got to be able to persuade somebody that it's cool and that it's valuable and that they'll pay you to do it, or else you'll never get to do it. So you've always got to be persuading people. But, you know, I'm going to speak out both sides of my mouth, because these persuasive papers, they're not sales pitches. You don't just come in here and try and sell a technology or an idea straight to somebody. That's not how they work. And I'll explain a little bit more about it. Now, the type of white papers that I get involved with the most are these problem solution white papers. And I'll show you a brief example of one, just to give you a feel for the design and the outline of it. But it's essentially what it sounds like. Somebody has a problem, you come up with a solution or an idea that you're trying to persuade them to accept, and then you can move out on. We also do some things called position papers. Those are more opinion-generated papers. That's where we're trying to get our general thoughts on a subject matter out to the world. Those are more one way. It's just you projecting out what your opinions or thoughts are. Lengths of white papers, 2 to 20 pages is the range that I typically see. Shorter the better. And some important points here. These are really what we consider as pre-proposals, because in my world of contract R&D, we make our money when somebody has a problem and they've got money, and they come to us and we propose a solution to sell to them, and they contract us to do that work. And so that's where the money gets exchanged between Batelle and the clients. Well, to get to that proposal stage, that contractual mechanism that has all the details, all the obligations, what they actually really sign, that's a long and tedious process. And what we like to do is go into this pre-proposal stage. That's where the white paper lives. And the reason why we do that is up here, because it's about engagement. You want to make sure that you're engaging both sides, the client and then myself on the other side. We want to make sure we're both engaged and we're both in alignment. Because you can be in a meeting with somebody and you can be talking all day long to each other and everybody's nodding their head, and then you discover after you leave that all they were doing was they were hearing what you were saying, they were hearing the King's English that was coming out of your mouth, but they really didn't listen. There was no active listening, there's no understanding. So how do you remedy that? How do you fix that? Well, you go back, you generate a white paper relatively quickly to get your thoughts down on paper, then you shoot it over to the client, then you iterate back and forth until you find that you've reached some common ground. And what that also does, and it minimizes time on both sides. Because you got to realize once you get out there, it's not about showing up for class and having an assignment that's due the next week. Here you show up for a client meeting, and your boss is paying for your time while you're sitting there in that client meeting, and until you can persuade that client to pick up your idea and run with it, you're on your boss's dime. And they want to minimize that, because from their side, time is money. It's the same way on the client side. They're putting time into their people. They want to keep iterating over somebody generating a 30 to 100 page proposal that is nowhere near what they want, because that takes a lot of time. You don't want to lose weeks. You need to condense this down to hours. And so a white paper enables you to do that. Now, these are just some general insights. I've been at Batelle for over 15 years now. I've seen countless, I've seen over 100 white papers. I'd be scared to even know what the number actually is. But just whenever I thought about coming into this class, and I thought, well, what are the kind of the main themes or topics that I see all the times with white papers? First one is a hard one to swallow, because no one really wants to read anything you generate. They don't. And actually, nobody really wants to listen to you either. Maybe your mamas do, I hope, but you probably put them to sleep too after a few minutes. So you really need to accept this fact that no one really wants to read it. It's always fighting this uphill battle. You've got to be able to hook somebody within seconds. The numbers I've seen on various studies, anywhere from 2 to 5 seconds is what you have to actually grab the attention of a key decision maker in industry. Because you've got to hook them in those first few seconds, or they're not going to continue to read. They're never going to get to your idea, your great idea that you think is so wonderful, that your baby that you've brought all the way along. They're going to pass and move on within the first few sentences or paragraphs, however long it takes for them to get through those first few seconds of just scanning. And I will point out too, That's also true for your resumes. I'll give you a kind of data point there. I get a stack of over 100 resumes. I might have less than an hour to make my first cut. So how much time am I going to spend on your resume? You've got to be able to really get somebody hooked, show why you're different, why you matter. This one may be an obvious one. Be simple. No one wants to see your thesaurus. We want everything to be simple, be clear, be concise, and you've got to be credible. You can't be selling something that you clearly don't understand. I think this is the most important thing. Is always knowing why we do things is important. This goes well beyond white papers. Hopefully you'll pick up on this. It's not always about what's going on, it's about why it's going on. And for here, whenever you're talking to somebody else and they've got a problem, you need to truly understand the significance of what you're proposing. You need to convince them we call it the so what. It's why does it matter? Why does your solution matter in terms of solving their problem? And then obviously you've got to have genuine interest in their problem. You can't just come on there and start shoving a technology or an idea down somebody's throat. You've got to show that you have genuine interest in their problem, because that's where they're living, that's where their pain is. You're trying to find out what the pain is and bring an aspirin to it. You cannot care so much about your idea, which is really how most people operate. They only care about their idea, and they're trying to shove it down somebody's throat for them to accept it. That's not the way to go. You've got to take a step back, you've got empathy for their situation, and truly care about their problem. And then, once you demonstrate that, when you show what that idea is or that solution, they'll accept it much more readily. That's where you do the pitch. And that's where it's a little bit different than a sales pitch. Obviously, you got to be clear on your objective and what you're going to deliver. If people are going to sign up for something, they're going to invest in it, and they're going to go with you, well, it better be clear what you're going to deliver in the end. And then design is important. And I'll show you an example here in a second of a white paper. But we're talking about getting away from long paragraphs. Those are they're a visual nightmare when somebody's trying to read through something very quickly. You want to be able to grab their attention, use the right visual aids, and use the right mixture of them where they make sense. And we're talking about figures, we're talking about graphs, we're talking about images, we're talking about bulleted lists are always better than a paragraph. You'd be surprised how many paragraphs you write that can be pulled out into bulleted lists. When you get to the full proposal stage, go into as much detail as you want, but you got to sell them at the white paper stage. Get to the bulleted list, get the right headings, all those types of things. Okay, now this is an actual white paper to a commercial client, one that I generated not too long ago, and it resulted in a successful proposal, successful contract win. And you're going to laugh because it looks like a CIA document. Everything is blacked out. The reason why everything's blacked out, it's not important for you to really read the words and understand it. You're just looking at this from a design perspective, how this white paper is laid out. But there's proprietary information with the client, proprietary information from Batelle. Those are the reasons why it's blacked out. If you look here, this is just how Batelle tends to do it for commercial clients. After being in operation for over 75 years, we find with commercial clients, the word opportunity resonates with them on both sides. And this is the opportunity for them to solve the problem. We have somebody to solve the problem. This is where we start to lay out, okay, this is our view of the world. After having discussions with the client, this is where we see the opportunity to advance their state of the art, where they're at. This is their problem set. And we start here. We don't get into the full definition of it, we hit it at a high level. And then we hit at high level, you see here we already started in with new headings, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We give an overall feeling that this is a long project, it's got multiple phases to it. That helps them mitigate their risk if they know they can go to phase 1. If it doesn't work out, they can walk away. Phase 2, they can walk away. It breaks it up to where they can see this program in manageable chunks. Then you see here, we're clearly going to state the objective, where the objective of phase 1 is to bang, 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 1, 2, 3. Then we hit a background section. This is where we get in there and we show them even more, how much more we care about their problem. We're not introducing our technology yet. We're not saying how wonderful Batelle is. We're getting in here and saying, here's what we understand about the problem. And you can see here's where the first set of bullets start coming in. We refer to a figure. In this one we actually worked with one of our graphic designers. We said, here's how we understand the problem, how the clients explained it to us. There was no visual aids coming from the client. It was very hard for us to understand. So we had them do this complex graphic. It was a couple hours of a graphic designer's time, but it was worth it to convey. We truly understood what their pain was. And now we get into the approach. So here's where we start talking about what we love. This is what people usually spend all their time on. And they usually drive this up front. Well, we want to clearly show we understand that problem, lay out the objective, what they're going to get, and then we get into our technical approach. And we're very specific here. We say, here's where we're going to achieve the objective. The approach is tied back to the objective. Then we're going to focus on the specific outcome of the first phase will be. Second phase will then focus here. And if desired, we're not trying to shove it on people, there could be a third phase of work. And then we break into different headings. Phase 1, task 1. Now we start outlining all the various tasks here. And again, these are not very long paragraphs, but there's enough detail there for them to understand what's going on. And we tell them specifically, here's the outcome of this task. We told them what they're going to get with the first phase, now we're telling them what they're going to get with each task. Being very specific. Don't hide things. These things do not need to be novels with surprise endings. Give them the bottom line up front. Clearly tell them, this is what we'll do. And then we march down through all the various tasks. But here we're telling about deliverables. We want to be very specific about the objectives and the deliverables. What they're going to get. What are they going to hold in their hand? What questions will be answered at the end of this outcome? Don't hide it. Don't put it in narrative prose. Give it to them where they can actually check them off. And then we outline some assumptions, give some feel for schedule and fees. Those are not always in white papers. And Batelle, we've got some contractual things that you don't need to worry about either. But hopefully you get the gist of it. Be very clear, very deliberate, break up in visual aids. Question?
What's the difference between, what are you putting in the opportunity part that's different from the technical? Or is it just like
opportunity is a high level.
Okay.
It's a high level. Company X has approached us with this unique problem. They are dominating this market space, and they need this problem solved. And it's maybe a one-liner about what the problem is. Then when you get into the background section, that's where you really fall in love with the problem, show how much care there is into the problem, and you really lay it out. And that's where we had graphics and other figures.
So are you not sharing how you're going to solve the problem at all?
In the technical approach section, that's
Okay.
all about how we're going to solve it.
Gotcha.
Top part's why. The approach is how, and then by the time you start walking through the approach, you start getting into the what. Here's what exactly we'll do each task, and here's what we'll deliver. Okay. You should always be thinking why, how, what in that order. If you start thinking about it, you'll realize most people think what, then they think how, and they rarely get to why. Question?
I walked on the late, so forgive me if you've already covered
Sure.
this. But how do you get to the first step? You just said that company X approached you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have certain people ever that actually go out and look for problems that companies have?
Yeah,
or do you how does it start?
We do it in multiple ways. There's times when people will come and approach us. There's times when just based on a reputation. There's times where we'll have a client already in hand that will come to us with new problems. There's times when we have our own, we call them business developers. We send them out and they go and cold call companies, or they go to conferences or whatever. They find where the people are that have the problems.
Yeah.
So there's multiple ways. Okay, I just want to hit on just a few more somewhat random thoughts, but I think they're all connected here. Yvonne mentioned that you all working with startups. So I just want to hit on some of my experience with startups. I've done a lot of work with them. I've been a part of them. I hit on a lot of the same things, but just realize that these are extremely important with startups. This is something I call, you've got to have cognitive empathy. This is what I've been hammering about really understanding the client better, is you've got to have empathy for them on this cognitive level. You've got to care about and understand what they're thinking and why they're thinking it. Why are they in front of you? All the constraints that they're under. Because you find a lot of times in this type of business, You have a stable job. People are coming to you because their back's against the wall. They have a problem to where their job may be on the line. They may be fired in a week or so if they can't get this figured out. If it's a startup, maybe the company's going to shut down because they're running out of funding. Usually in very different modes. And you've got to understand what the client's feeling is much more important than what you're feeling. To do that, you got to check your ego. This is a huge problem, but I'm a Ph.D. PhDs are the worst because you got to have an ego to get to that level sometimes. But no matter what level you're at, always check your ego. Always realize it's not about you, it's about them. Be aware of their culture and time. I'm probably hitting on this a little bit here. For a startup, having 50% of the solution today or tomorrow is better than 100% of the solution a week from today, or a month, or however much longer it is. You've got to understand what type of time frame they're moving on, because there's times where they just can't wait, and you're not going to have the perfect product to deliver to them. So get them what they need when they need it. You get comfortable delivering partial solutions. Have a differentiator. I've touched on this a little bit about being able to go through all the information that's out there, make non-obvious connections, be able to create original thoughts. Those are the types of things that they're looking for. Plenty of people are pitching to them all the time, but very few of them are different than the next person. Getting your white papers down to a 5-minute pitch. This is absolutely critical. You will develop this white paper, and somebody they'll read it and they'll want you to come in and talk about it. Then you'll go and you'll put together this 20-slide deck that you think is the most beautiful thing on the earth, and you spend all this time on, and then you show up and they don't want to hear the 20-slide deck. They may only have time for that 5-minute pitch. You may never make it to the conference room. They may just meet you out by a food truck or something and say, let's go, let's start walking. And you've got maybe 5 minutes to hit them with it. So in those 5 minutes, you better be able to hit on all those elements of your white paper. So you better really understand their problem. You better know the so what, your differentiator, all those things. And read your audience. This just builds on that a little bit more. If you show up with your 20-slide deck and you are determined to shove it down their throat, and then you better be paying attention to them, because if they're giving you the feel that, I don't want to hear that, I want the 5-minute pitch, or I want something else, you better be able to adjust to it very quickly. And this quote always keeps me in line with that. It's Mike Tyson. He's the heavyweight champion of the world. And for a long time, every time a challenger contender came up, they talked to the media about this wonderful plan that they had on how they were going to beat Mike Tyson. And then the media circus would go to Tyson and say, what do you think about so-and-so's plan? And he said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so I always think about, all right, what's going to happen when I come in with my slide deck, or whatever it is I'm going to try and present to somebody, and next thing I know, I get punched in the mouth because they don't want it. What am I going to do? I got to adjust quickly. So reading your audience is really critical. I just have 2 more quick slides. Just want to cram this in here. One of the things that's important when you're dealing with white papers or proposals in industry is getting used to using the track changes tools. This is something we use in Microsoft Word. Up here, this is just an example. You don't have to read the words. Trust me, it's a beautifully written abstract because I authored it and got cut up by a bunch of people on it, so I know it's there. But this is an abstract to a proposal. It's a massive proposal, so it's the next stage down from the white paper. But it helps illustrate these few points I want to make. It was in a massive proposal. It was somewhere around 50+ pages, resulted in a multi-million-dollar win. But this is essentially the written form of that 5-minute pitch, condensed into an abstract. And the point I want to drive home here is you need to use certain tools like track changes when you're doing technical communications. And the main reason for this one is because you have many stakeholders involved here. You've got 5 or 6 people, even just on your side, that have probably talked to the client and have heard this, and they all have their own opinions on what the client wants and how that needs to be messaged. Well, you've got to manage that. You know, if this is going to be your project, you've got to manage it. You're the main author on this proposal or this white paper. It's almost like having multiple teachers that are grading your work. So you can imagine handing the same assignment to multiple teachers. They're all going to grade it differently. They're all looking for something slightly different. But hopefully they're all hovering around the core message. You still have to make them all happy, right? Because for this paper to go out the door, maybe 5 or 6 people have to approve this. So the only way you can get all these opinions together in one coherent message within hours, or at least a shortened time span, is to use something like track changes. And you also have to prepare yourself that you guys are probably all used to getting straight A's and being perfect and all these things. When you're doing one of these in industry, you'll be lucky to get a B. You'll be lucky to make about 80% of all their changes integrated into one document. You just can't make everyone happy. And so this is what that paragraph looked like, a day before it got finalized. And I should have shown that in red, a little bit brighter red, to really show how bad that's bleeding. But I mean, this looks like an absolute failure from where I started. When I generated the abstract, I kicked it out to 5 or 6 of my supposed friends and colleagues, and then they just destroyed it. Well, they're not coming after me. It's nothing personal. Everybody's involved to deliver the right product, the right message. That's what matters. What matters is what the client's going to think. So everybody's trying to do the right thing. I can't take it personal because you have to accept not everyone's going to like your product, just like not everybody's going to like you. Back to your mama, hopefully she does, but everybody else is going to be focused on the final product to the client. And the only way you're going to get there is to go through something like track changes, because there's just no other way to effectively and efficiently pull all together everybody's input within hours to where you've got all the collective input from all the stakeholders, and you've got a clear message, and you've improved the product to the level, the product here we're talking about a written report or proposal, to get to the proper level to meet the client's needs. Okay, so quick summary, there's a lot of distractions out there. You need to find ways to focus, see through it all. You need to be able, obviously, as you're digging through all that noise that's out there, you need to be able to make those non-obvious connections, develop original thoughts, and then you've got to get to the point to where you care about people's problems more than your approaches. You have to pull all that together and then deliver these type of products, these type of outputs. Okay? Any questions? Comments?
We have time for a couple of questions. Anybody? Thinking about the white paper you're about to write? Anything of what you're thinking about doing that you might ask about?
Yeah.
I know you have a lot of stuff redacted in that example white paper, but is there a chance that we can use that resource to model our white papers?
Yeah, that PDF will be available.
It's already on Carmen.
Class.
Perfect.
And keep in mind, every white paper looks a little bit different, but those type of design concepts are pretty similar, at least in terms of the proportions.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Have you worked at Batelle exclusively for 15 years, or have you worked at other places? And if you have, are there major differences between different industries' white papers, or is it?
No, yeah, I mean, I've spent time at, well, for one, I personally I've worked at DuPont and NASA and Batelle during my tenure. And my time at Batelle, I've interacted with hundreds of companies and government agencies. So I've worked with the whole spectrum. And when it comes to the government agencies, very little changes. Sometimes they'll even put out the formats that they want, but they have similar content, similar themes. This one here is the one that I showed here is more of the more elusive one, which is usually in industry. What I find a lot of times is that we're helping them understand what they really mean in terms of a white paper. They don't know what white paper is for the most part, or they call it different names. And so we usually take the lead and we present it to them, and that's some of the value we provide, that we can actually do this. And they've never seen it before or something like that. And they're like, oh, that's wonderful. I've seen them adopt it into their own companies from time to time. places like DuPont and others, it just varies even so much across the entire company in terms of how they communicate. They usually try and drive them down into memos, and they become more, within companies, they become more position papers. It's usually kind of a one-way communique. It's somebody trying to change or persuade somebody in their management chain to do something differently. And so they're usually writing this one-way position paper. And those ones don't have all the information I have here, like in terms of a template, with my example. But all those other key elements are still there in terms of, deep understanding of the problem. Here's how I would go about solving it, and here's why it matters. Here's the so what. Those are still, when you boil it all down, those three elements are going to be in all of them. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
that is.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
Sure.